Hello and welcome to the Indy Author podcast. Today, my guest is Kristopher Zgorski. Hey, Christopher, how are you doing?
Good morning. Hello. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. To give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background on you, Kristopher Zgorski is the founder and sole reviewer at the crime fiction book blog BOLO Books. In 2018, he was awarded the Mystery Writers of America Raven Award for Outstanding Achievement in the Mystery Field outside the realm of creative writing. Christopher writes a column on digital crime fiction resources for Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, and his blog reviews are syndicated in his column in Deadly Pleasures Mystery Magazine. He has served on the board of directors for Malice Domestic, a crime fiction convention celebrating the traditional mystery, and Christopher is a member of Sisters in Crime and was the 2022 fan guest of honor at Left Coast Crime. And I invited Christopher on the podcast because I got to hear him speak at a New England Crime Bake, my conference with my favorite title, on the do's and don'ts of working with book bloggers. And so we're going to be diving into that in a moment. But Christopher, I wanted to just start out finding out from you what made you start up BOLO Books?
It was a long journey. It seemed sort of like when people look back at it, it seemed like an overnight success, but I actually was building to that for a very long time by going to crime fiction conventions every year. So even before I had launched it, I thought that was something I might eventually do. So I was building that framework so that when I launched it, it really did take off quite rapidly. Um, Unbeknownst even to me, I didn't expect it to do what it did as quickly as it did. But I realize now looking back that it was that groundwork, that possibility.
So I think that we had talked a little bit about the fact that I was very attracted to this topic that we're going to be discussing because it's applicable way beyond just pitching book blogs. But I think there's another possible, more generalizable lesson, which is you're talking about like laying the groundwork for the success of your book blog. Were there other things other than getting out there at the conferences, talking to people that you think was responsible for your success?
It really was making connections and getting to know people. I mean, the conferences helped to do that because I could put a face to a name and they would see me regularly. But even just on social media alone, if you can't go to book conventions, you can build a network of people around you that are going to help you when you take whatever next step that is, whether it be writing your book and the first book is coming out, whether it's finally getting an agent, whatever you're doing. Building a network of people around you is going to be the key to get you there because none of us can do this by ourselves. It's just not a possibility.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And again, applicable way beyond just if you're thinking about starting a book blog. So I love the list of do's and don'ts you provided at New England Crime Bake, and we've picked a couple that we're going to hit. There's a longer list. We might get to more, but I thought I would just throw out one of the do's or don'ts and ask you to comment. And the first do we're going to talk about is follow book blogs to get a general idea of the community.
Yeah, I think this is really important. I think you need to know, in order to know how to target your solicitations, you need to know what's out there. And if you don't know that, you're going to be stumbling and doing the wrong thing. So I say, please go out and look at all the blogs that are out there. I know it takes time. I get this response from authors all the time. Like, I just don't have the time to do that. If you want a career, you're going to have time to do this because otherwise it's just not going to work. So you need to make the time somehow. And it doesn't take a whole lot of every day you have to be there 24/7. Like, pick a day and say, this is the day I'm going to do research on blogs and just follow them around and do that once a week for a month. And you'll have a background in what's going on. So you want to know what's out there and what people are covering and who's covering what, because not every blog covers every type of book. So it's important to know that when you're sending your pitches, that you're sending them to people who are going to be responsive to that. And you're only going to know that by looking at what's happening in the blogging community. So I say first look at the blogs that everybody is targeting, and that's happens to be blessing that BOLO Books is on that list. But there are many others. So it's like find what those blogs are so you can see what it is that people are attracted to about those blogs. It's probably things like consistency, quality of review, breadth of knowledge of the genre that you're writing in, those kinds of things. So find those blogs and follow them. And then find the other one. I say to people, when I started, there was a time when BOLO Books struggled to find authors who wanted to be covered by me. I mean, it's not like I launched right and everybody was like, oh my God, let's send Chris's book, our book. You need to find new bloggers who are at the same point in their career that you are. So if you're a new writer and your first book is not yet out, start following bloggers who are just starting out so that you can marry up with them and follow your career through. There are people who jumped on board a BOLO Books very early in its existence, who I still will do anything for those authors today because they supported me way back when nobody knew who I was. So they get a boost because they were there at the beginning. So you need to find bloggers, and there are always new bloggers who are at the point of the career where you are so that you can match up and help each other along the journey.
It's interesting to think about that because I just gave a talk on the business of short fiction. And one of the pieces of advice I often share, which I actually stole from Douglas Smith in his Playing the Short Game, excellent Playing the Short Game book, is if you're submitting, and I'm recognizing this is a different sort of scenario, but if you're submitting a story, you might as well start at the top. And so if your dream is to see your work in Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, then don't say, well, I'll wait and do that later. I'll just submit to some rinky dink one. Because once you've submitted it to the rinky dink one, and if they take it, then you've taken yourself out of the running for Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine. Now, I recognize that book blogging is a little bit different because it's not like you have to pick one and then you're stuck with it. Like, you can have your book reviewed by multiple reviewers.
Right.
But I do kind of see the benefit of making your mistakes early on reviewers that are also learning. And like you might be more sympathetic to each other's fumblings if you're both early.
I think
Does
that's
that make
true.
sense?
But I also agree that if you want to aim high, if BOLO Books is someplace you really want to be reviewed at, then send a query. I mean, you just know that you've done your research and it's a fit and all that kind of stuff, then go for it. But also, you need to have a thick skin and know that if you get a no, don't take it personally and don't let that sway you from the future. Like, it's not the end of the world if all of your top blogs turn you down for your first book, because there may be the third book that comes along that we all absolutely love, and we've already heard your name. So don't be too shy about it. Just know that if you're getting turned down, there are probably multiple reasons, and we'll go into some of this in a little bit in other topics. But just know you're not always going to get the yeses that you want. And that's just, you need to know that going in. And you should already know that because you probably, if your book is coming, you're looking for a review, you've probably been through this process when you were looking for an agent. You've been through this process when you were looking for a publisher. So you know everyone is not going to say yes. And you just need to know going in that that's the same case when it gets to the future part of the process.
Yeah, I think thinking in terms of even if one is making up the numbers, you know that every agent is getting 1,000 submissions for every one they take, and so it's not a matter of quality. There are a whole bunch of other considerations that are going into it. There's just a certain amount of bandwidth that any of those people, publishers, agents, book reviewers have, and not hitting that tiny proportion that they can fit in their bandwidth be sold.
People in the actual community have no clue the number of queries bloggers get on a daily basis. Like you think you know what that number is, but I can tell you it's a much bigger number than what you think. It certainly was bigger than what I thought. And when you get to the level that BOLO Books is at and other blogs that are like that, sometimes I don't even get queries. I'm just getting books. So the number of volumes of books that are arriving at the house is just astronomical. So you're competing with a pitch against the book that's actually here in my hands because the publisher already knows how to get a hold of me. So it's a tough road. And you're right. You just don't know what that number is, but I can tell you it's higher than you think.
Yeah, take whatever number it is and multiply it by 4 or something like that.
Exactly. Something like that.
And I wanted to make one more observation about the one do we've talked about so far, and that is, as with podcasting, I think you need to be ideally a reader of book reviews to operate in the environment successfully to become a reviewed book, because I think it accustoms you more to what people are looking for, what the process is, what the expectation should be. I mean, I know when people ask me what they need to do to become a guest on a podcast, I say, well, do you listen to podcasts? And if the answer is no, then I say, well, first of all, you have to listen to some podcasts because you can't really be a good guest unless you understand the gestalt. Do you think that actually plays out in the book review world?
I do. I think you should be following and active in reading criticism. Also, you need to know, like BOLO Books and several others, at least my closest friends in the blogging community, we don't do negative reviews. So our goal, we really think of ourselves more as book advocates. We want to promote the books that we love as opposed to turn people away from books that we didn't like. I certainly will talk to you in a bar over a glass of wine about books I hate, but I'm never going to post a negative review on a blog because I don't want to discourage anyone from reading anything. I don't care what you read. You can read the worst trash, in my opinion, out there. But if you're reading, I'm happy because that's still more than the average person in the society is reading. So I'm not about to say, don't read that because it's bad. If you ask me, I might tell you, like I said, over a glass of wine, but never will I do a negative review. So you need to know that when you're asking for a review from a blog like that, you're only going to get the review if they like the book. So you're sort of, it's a win-win really, because with us, you're going to send it to us. And if we hate it, we're just not going to talk about it. So you're not going to get the negative press. But if we love it, then you're going to get really good press. Now, there's, of course, the old adage that no press is bad press. And there's some accuracy to that, but that's just not how we run. So going into that, you need to know that. So you would only know that by visiting BOLO Books and knowing that I don't do completely negative reviews. This doesn't mean that I only do really glowing reviews either. I mean, I do criticize things that don't work, but I'm just, if a book overall I wouldn't recommend, I just choose not to mention it.
Yeah, and I think that's another good reason to be familiar with the reviewing world in general and the specifics of the reviewer you're submitting to, because not everybody is going to have that theory. And if you send your book to somebody who is perfectly happy to post a negative review and they don't expect it, then that can be an unpleasant surprise.
Exactly. I mean, you do need to know that and take that risk. Yeah, it's that's a case the fact, especially if you've gone to a blog and you've seen that they've been scathing to other books that, or especially if they seem unnecessary or they seem like attacks on the author or whatever that have nothing to do with the book, you might want to steer clear of them because it's clear that they don't have that ethic that you might want your book to be focused on.
Yep. So I think that's actually a great entree to one of the other do's that we wanted to talk about, which is be aware of a blogger's role in the overall community. For example, book advocates, not just book reviewers. Any other tips you'd like to share on that front?
Yeah, I would say that you want to find there's a whole lot that goes on behind just the review of a book on a blog. I mean, that's great and get the eyes on it and people read it. But if you can get to know the people who people are looking to for information, and believe me, when I started out, I didn't think of myself as an influencer, but somehow along the way, that seems to be what happened. But I don't think any book blogger goes into this thing. It's not like the fashion industry or the music industry where you're going into social media with the idea that you're going to become an influencer and that's going to make you famous thing. Books, the book world, it's very hard to become famous in the book world no matter what you're doing. So the idea that you would go in looking to be an influencer is not something you're going to see a lot of in the blogging community. There may be a few. Maybe I would be, just in my biased opinion, I might say that some bookstagrammers are more interested in celebrity, and I only say that because it seems like they want to be in the picture with the book, like they're trying to promote themselves as much as they are promoting the book. So it's just a weird thing. It's just not my thing, but I respect it and I actually think it's a great new tool that can be used. But find those bloggers that are people are looking to for information. For example, my Facebook page, I'm very active on my Facebook page. And occasionally I'll do a hashtag book mail post where I just post the covers of books that came in the mail that week, that day, whatever. I mean, whatever reason makes me think, oh, let's do one of those today. I'll have a stack of books or two books or whatever. But those books may eventually never get reviewed. I may read them and they may be awful, but because I like the cover or they came in on the right day or whatever, I'll post them. So they're getting eyes on the covers that is going to bring readers to them even without my review. Find people like that that are doing other things. People like me who are going to conventions who talk in the hallways about books we're reading, even those that we might not have reviewed or that we might be future reviewing, or we might be even thinking of reviewing. Like people always ask me, what are you looking forward to in the future? And I'll give a list of books sounded interesting to me. Some of them may not be things I ever review, but that person heard about them even though I never reviewed them. You want to find people like that, people who are doing like the masterclass that you talked about that Drew and I gave at New England Crime Bake. If we've been invited to do that, you know that somebody somewhere along the way thinks that what we're offering is valuable. So look for those kind of people in addition to blogs that are not doing that. Because again, there are great blogs like people who can't travel, they can't afford to travel, they physically can't travel. They're still doing great blogs. So I don't want to say discount them, but I'm just saying look for ones that have other additions as well so that you can build that resume. Because ideally, you want some of those really big ones that everybody's talking about, some in the middle that are known but aren't, and then those new ones that are up and coming that again, like you've latched on to early so that they'll follow you through your whole career. So you want all of those. So find the people others are looking for guidance beyond just the review. So, and that includes, I mean, I talk about on my Facebook page TV shows I'm watching. So people come to me looking for TV shows, even though I don't very rarely. I used to in the early days of BOLO Books review TV and movies, but I just don't have time to do that anymore. But I do talk about them on my Facebook page. So people are like, oh, great. I'm so glad I've been looking for something to stream. And now Christopher has told me that this is a show I should watch. I'm going to go ahead and watch that. Doing what things much beyond that. I talk about theater a lot because, or I did before COVID, because I go to theater a lot and go to New York and see local stuff. So there's a lot of other stuff happening, and you get to see, you also learn more about me so you can know what my tastes are. So you can see how that aligns with what your tastes are. So follow those bloggers that you love on their social media accounts and get to know them without the caveat that, oh, I'm going to get a review with them. Just follow them because you like them and you want to hang out with them at the bar at the convention or whatever. And those things will grow organically from that.
Well, that is once again a great lead in to one of the other do's, which is use social media to share content for bloggers you're targeting. They will notice. And so we've talked a little bit about the author being a consumer of the material that the blogger is posting on social media. Can you talk a little bit about the other side of that?
Yeah, this is my most important tip. This is a tip I always highlight when I give this talk. And it's such a simple one, but people don't realize it. I mean, bloggers are not making any money. We're in the business of helping authors sell books so that they make money, but we're making no money from it. We're doing it for the passion. So you need to step back and take yourself out of the equation for a moment and say, what can I offer to this person is in return equal to, or at least some effort to be equal to, they're helping me make a whole lot of money, hopefully, theoretically. We want an audience. I mean, we're not writing these reviews for ourselves, although I will admit I did start thinking only I and my family and friends would read my reviews. That grew from there. I had no idea that was going to happen. But most bloggers are looking for an audience and they want to grow that audience. So share their content on your social media pages. Show us that you're reading our stuff and that you like it. Look, if I review Ann Cleeve's latest book and you love Ann Cleeve's, what is the harm in sending out a tweet saying, oh, look at this review of the new Ann Cleeves. I can't wait to read this. First of all, it shows the blogger that you are noticing these things. It's also helping to fill up your social media channel, which is what you want. I mean, your editors and agents are telling you to be out there and be active and get eyes on you, but you don't know what to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about themselves. And we all know if you oversell yourself, then you're doing, but you can share other people's good news at the same time, they're seeing your name. They're like, "Oh, look, Maddie is talking about Ann Cleeves. That's great. Maybe they know each other. Whatever. Maybe you know Ann Cleeves. Maybe you don't. It doesn't matter. You're filling up that social media with things that are also benefiting you because bloggers will notice. If I get two pitches on the same day, two, like we said, I'm getting 40, but whatever. If I get two on the same day, I have only one slot and I look at them and I say, oh, look, so and so always shares my reviews on social media and this person doesn't. These books are otherwise equal. I'm going to go with the person who has done something for me.
Yep.
And that's just the nature of the beast. I mean, we all will do that. It's not that I want to ignore the other person, but if I have to make a choice, and I do because there's only so much time in the day, you want all of the coins that can push you in the right direction on your side of the table so that when that choice comes, the choice is you.
Yeah, I'd like to point people to a great episode that I think is a great companion piece to what you just said, which is episode 157, which is Literary Citizenship with Jane Friedman.
Yeah.
I got to hear Jane talk about literary citizenship, which is exactly what you're saying. You know, the best thing you can do for yourself is to help other people in your writing community. And yeah, I think it's a message that can't be emphasized too much. And the other thing that I find is sometimes I find people are complying with that advice about sharing other people's work, but I think they're losing an opportunity because they're not flagging the person. And so if I were to share a review that you had done on Facebook or whatever, I would do at Below Books or at Ann Cleeves or whatever it is so that it's more likely to show up on that person's radar and, you know, and sometimes you can engage in a little conversation with one of your favorite people because they say, "Oh, so glad you enjoyed it," or "Thank you for the nice comment," or whatever. So that's both fun
Absolutely.
and
And agree with
practical.
us. I will say be very careful. Make sure you read the review because you don't want to an author if it's a bad review. So don't just like, oh, see, Anne Cleve got reviewed and just suddenly tweet that out because I'm in a rush and I need to do something.
Yeah.
And then find out later that the review is horrible.
Yeah.
So careful. I mean, make sure you're reading what it is you're sharing if you're going to share in that way. But people share my book mail posts all the time. And there's no harm in that. I mean, all you have to do is hit retweet or repost on Facebook because all you're sharing is the cover of the book. I mean, I don't even say anything about the book. I'm like, these are the books that came in this week. So there's no harm in sharing those kind of things without, and you don't have to do a whole lot of reading, like if you don't have the time to read the reviews. But you should be reading reviews of books that are similar to yours anyway, because if you are trying to have a career, you want to see what's resonating with the readers out there of that genre. If Cleves is writing books that are similar to yours, I don't know why you wouldn't read some of her reviews. Even if you don't read her books because you might not have the time, you can read her reviews and get an idea of what it is in those books that's resonating with the reader, that reviewer in this case, who in blogging cases is just usually an average reader. So those are the people you're targeting. Newspaper reviews are great. Obviously, everybody wants to be reviewed in the New York Times and everything like that, but that doesn't happen for everybody. And they're also blogs, I think, and this is a controversial opinion, and afraid to share it, is that I think blogs are less discriminatory in what they're choosing to review. Newspapers, while it looks like they're doing great service and they're trying to promote great literature, and in many ways they are, there's also a business behind them. The goal of anything the newspaper publishes is to sell subscriptions to the newspaper, not to sell the book for the author and make them money. That is not their goal. A blog doesn't have that same background. Like, I mean, I want to build my audience, but I'm not getting anything unless you're going to blogs that have advertising involved and the clicks get them more money. That may be a case where they're just trying to get traffic there. And I always caution people, if you're looking at traffic of blogs, look to see if the blog is giving books away, because as soon as you give a book away, you're going to get a whole lot of people visiting because they want the free book. But those people are not reading the review. They probably don't even want to read the book. They just want something free. So BOLO Books has never given anything away free. Other blogs do. You know, it works for them and that's great. But I just say don't judge your traffic based solely on those kind of things because there's things happening behind the scenes that you don't know.
Well, we've gotten through a couple of the do's, so I also want to hit a couple of the don'ts, which are sometimes even more fun than the do's. And first don't that we were going to talk about is don't send a one sentence query with a link to your book on Amazon, and don't ask the blogger to buy your book.
Never ask if you're querying or pitching your book as a review for a blog, please don't ask us to buy your book. It's just not going to happen. I mean, I was thinking about this last night getting ready for this podcast, and I was just roughly in my head. And I think probably about 70% of the books I review are books that were given to me in ARC form free on the publisher altar or however the process at a convention, however I got them. But 70% of them are probably books I got for free. But there's 30% of those books that I'm still reviewing that are books I walked into the bookstore, saw, purchased, and ended up reviewing. It's not that we're not going to review a book that we purchased, but I can guarantee you that I've never reviewed a book because the author told me to go buy it and review it. Like if you're spending the time to reach out to me and say, please review my book, you might want to have a sentence in there about, I'm happy to provide you with a copy for your convenience because it's going to be much more likely to get a positive response. I could go to the library and get free books for a whole lot less effort than what I'm doing on the blog. So it's not like I'm just trying to hoard all the free books I can get in the world. And there may be a few bloggers. I think that like for BE, those conventions, ALA, the American Library Association conferences, people go to those and there are some people that go there just to gather as many books as they can. That is not what most book bloggers are doing. We're doing a lot of work to get those free books. They're not just getting sent to us willy-nilly. If I just wanted the free book, I would do it at the library. So you're offering that book to me is not going to hurt you in the long run if it's a blog that you really want. You know, like, granted, I understand you can't offer a free book to every blog that's out there because you're trying to make some money. That's why you go back to the dues and you have done your research to find out which blogs it is you want to target, and you can target those with the free stuff. Then I don't know how you're going to get to the ones that you're not offering the free stuff to, but you can do that in a different way.
Yeah. Well, I think that the other thing that that was kind of a two-parter, and the other part that I wanted to hit was the send a one-sentence query because that just says generic query written all over it. And this is why I want to copy all these and put them on a page saying, "Are you thinking of pitching me to be a guest on the podcast? Read this list first," because it applies to podcasts too.
It can.
And that feeling that if you're just one of 1,000 people, the sender has picked off a list somewhere on the internet and they're just replacing the to address, those people are never going to get a position on the podcast. And I'm guessing you're not going to get their book reviewed in
No,
Polo
they're not,
Books.
and we know that. I mean, sometimes I think that the people who are sending these in think that we're clueless, and we're like, "Oh, well, we'll never know that this is just a generic thing." But we're not stupid. We know that. And I expect that. I don't want you to write a new query letter every time, new pitch letter every time you send a thing in. But you can customize certain parts of it so that it sounds like it's not a generic letter. Just like you didn't like when the publisher sent you back a rejection letter and it was just, sorry, we're not interested. Like you wanted something more interactive. We want the same sort of thing. So we know that you're sending out 20 of these a morning and they're all going to be generally the same. But if you can say, "Hey, I noticed that you reviewed the new Katrina McPherson. My book is similar to that. You might be interested." Then I know that you're going a little bit beyond just sending out generic things and you're more likely to get a positive response.
Yeah, that's a nice one to combine with the earlier advice about following them on social media because you can drop in a line about, "I've really been enjoying your posts that show the covers of the books you've received in the mail that week," or whatever that is, thing that makes it clear that it's a little bit of a conversation, not just a, "Here's my book, here's my book."
Exactly.
Another don't is offer a PDF version of your manuscript for review, and I'll let you tell what it should be instead.
This has sort of been increasing, and I'm not sure what's going on out there in the community exactly. I mean, I know some of what's behind the scenes, but look, PDF is great for many things, but for a book reviewer, it is not very good. Like if I mean, yes, I can bring it into my Kindle, but it limits my ability to do what I need to do with it. I can't change the font size, this, that, and the other, unless I have other apps involved in the process. You really want to have an EPUB or a Mobi file that the person can use like they would any other reading experience that they're having. I take notes while I'm reading. I need to be able to have that ability to do that. Otherwise, it just isn't going to be usefulness that it ultimately could be. If you're on NetGalley, that's great. This is a place where I'll mention the fact that people will say they don't have ARCs or they don't have early versions. This is another interesting thing. Like you can be pitching to blogs, especially your top blogs, before you have those things in hand. Like if you know your book is coming out in November and you don't yet have the galley, but it's coming down the road, you can reach out and say, "Hey, I just want to get this book on your radar. I think you might really like it for whatever reasons, A, B, and C. Would it be okay if I reach out to you later down the road and let you know when I have a galley because they are coming? I just don't have them yet." Because of the way the supply chain is working, we're seeing more and more delays and that kind of thing. So don't wait until you have it in hand because likely that's going to be too late these days. I will confess here that my calendar is pretty booked up through May at the moment, and I have books on the calendar in October and November. The top logs fill up very quickly. So you don't want to wait because you're going to get shut out just by virtue of the fact that we can only read so much. So get yourself on the radar. Again, that's the reason why if you're following us on social media, I'm going to see your tweets, even your tweets that don't have anything to do with me. I see them. I see you post about your book. I see the cover. I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. I might do my own research and find it and add it to my calendar even before you even thought to reach out to me. I mean, I'm finding many of the books I review on my own actually seek out the authors or the publishers and send them to them. Many publishers already know what I'm looking for. So, like I said, those books are coming in unsolicited to my mailbox daily. So, don't wait until you have that, but always have something that is useful to the reviewer when you ultimately are going to say, "Here's a review, a pitch I would like you to do." Get those early requests in, but then send the EPUB or the NetGalley widget when you have them. But don't send me a PDF because I'm not going to print it out, which is what a PDF is meant to be. I mean, its main function, most useful function is to print it out and read it. And that's great, except I'm printing out a 400-page book. And it can be read on a computer really easily, but I'm not sitting at my desk reading all day. I mean, this is a pastime for me, not a job. So relaxing. So I want to be cuddled up with a blanket on my bed with the fireplace going, not tied to my computer. So
Yep.
PDF is just not the best way to go. So I would say avoid it when possible.
I imagine a lot of the listeners are familiar with BookFunnel, which is a common way of getting, for example, when I send out advanced copies of my books, I can send out an EPUB, a Mobi, a PDF via BookFunnel. Is that similar to NetGalley, that it would be an acceptable way of getting?
Exactly. It's perfectly similar to NetGalley. Those kind of things just show that your efforts. I mean, there was a long time early in the BOLO Books days when I would only review physical books. Like I just wasn't a digital reader. I wouldn't accept those. That has long since changed, especially with the pandemic. But and in fact, sometimes I prefer digital now to physical, but I still love a physical book. If you don't have the digital version and you don't have a physical version at this time, I have one author who always sends me a finished copy of the book. She's like, I can't get it to you early, Chris. I just don't have those options. But I want you to have this book because I know you collect them and I know you'll read them. Da, 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 da. So as soon as it publishes, I'm having the finished copy sent to you. I appreciate that. Doesn't guarantee that they're all going to get reviewed. In fact, they all haven't been reviewed. And she knows that, but she knows that I will have them on my shelves. I mean, you can see the bookshelves behind me. I do collect books. So it's great when that happens. I don't expect it. But if you don't have the option of an early galley version, then you've got to come up with some other way to offer it. And it may be, in fact, if I'm so interested in the book, you may say, oh my God, I'll send you a finished book when it's ready. And I may say, don't worry about it. I'm going to buy it. I've already pre ordered it. It's going to arrive on my Kindle the day it comes out. It sounds so interesting, but at least you put the book on my radar. So again, go in with the expectation that if you don't have what is needed to be offered, don't expect a positive response, but be happy when you get one instead as well.
Yeah, I think the timing is very tricky, especially because I imagine that the schedule is quite different between traditionally published authors and indie authors. So, I mean, my own situation is a good example that I met you and Drew at New England Crime Bake, I think in November, right? And Drew kindly, and we were chatting, and she invited me to send her the EPUB or Mobi, whatever it was, an electronic version when it was ready, which I did, a couple of weeks ago. It's launching at the end of January. And I had gotten it in my mind that you preferred print. And so I thought, well, I'm not going to be able to ask Christopher because my schedule is such that I have, say, 4 weeks ahead of the launch date, I had acceptable electronic versions that I could share, but I'm not going to have a print version until right near the launch date. And I suppose that maybe is starting to be true for traditionally published authors as
It
well.
definitely is. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's
Uh,
probably both understanding the reviewer's preference regarding print or not. And then if it's print, then they're just the considerations of, is it a schedule that you can comply with based on the current realities of the world?
Correct. One of the other do's that we're not covering is to make sure that you're reading the about page on the blogs that you love. Again, if you're not visiting the blogs you love, you're doing yourself a disservice. But when you're there, look at their things. I mean, we have review policies. There are things that are required for us from the FCC that we do. I mean, every one of my reviews where I get a free book, I have to put a disclaimer saying I got this book free and my opinion isn't biased by that. Sort of ridiculous because every newspaper in the world is getting free books and they don't have to put that disclaimer. But because I'm just a blogger, I have to put that kind of a
Hmm.
disclaimer, which I have no problem doing. I think people at this point know that I'm not biased by any outside source. But sure, if you want me to do that, I'll do that. But um, we put those kind of things in there, that kind of a statement or an about section where I tell you exactly what it is I'm looking for and what I like and how I want it to be given to me for a reason. So read those things. There's another thing, like this past year, I lost my mother very early in the year. I knew that I wasn't going to read as much as I did. I knew right from the get go, I was like, this is going to throw everything off. And I'd already made a lot of commitments that I knew I wasn't going to be able to keep. So I went up to my review thing on the about page and said, look, I'm not accepting any outside solicitations this year. I just can't do it. Doesn't mean I won't be reviewing things that I find. Doesn't mean you can't reach out to me and tickle ivories and say, maybe you're interested in this book. But just know that I'm just not accepting pitches because I'm in a situation where I cannot physically read for pleasure at the moment. So read those things. Don't assume that they haven't changed. Like if you sent it for your first book and you didn't get a response or you didn't get the review, and you're going to send it for the next book, go back to those about pages and reread it to make sure, first of all, that you did it right the first time. Maybe you missed a step, or maybe something has changed. Maybe I'm no longer accepting outside queries, or maybe I stopped doing young adult or whatever. So read those things to find out what it is. I mean, they're there for a reason.
Yeah, I think another great thing to be aware of is whether reviewers will accept your book after it's launched or only before it's launched. So be on the lookout books. Obviously, you want them before they're launched. I know I've had success with book bloggers who will accept the book after it's been launched, sometimes like a considerable time after it's been launched,
Oh, yeah.
especially if it's based in an area. So all my books have a very strong sense of place. I'm based in Chester County, Pennsylvania, outside Philadelphia. Many of my books are based there. And so when I find reviewers, local reviewers, and can say, this book came out last year, sometimes they'll take it, so just be aware of, like, the time frame too.
There are blogs that will cover backlist titles. I mean, there's a blog out there for everything. So don't even think that that's not the case. But again, if you've done your research, you know which blogs are doing that. There are cases where I have done older books. Generally speaking, I'm only looking to do a new release and aim for a time 2 weeks before release or 2 weeks after a release as the prime time for me. So that's just the way I do it. What I do. That doesn't mean all blogs are doing that. So maybe I'm not the right blog for you, or maybe it just doesn't work with the timeline, like you said. Don't take it personally. Just know that's it and find the blogs that will work with you, that do want to do older stuff that's been out for a while. Or like you said, maybe there's some other connection that the reason why, I mean, they didn't know it was out, but they're in that area. They're like, oh, yeah, I want to read that. I certainly am going to review it. So find those connections and use them to your advantage.
Yeah. I'm really liking I keep going back in my mind to the advice about the importance of sharing book bloggers' reviews on social media because I can imagine somebody might get through listening to this interview and say, "Oh, I just feel like it's overwhelming. I don't have the time." But if all they do is start sharing out the reviews, you never know. One of those reviewers that you reference that you're sending readers to, you might hear from them in 6 months or a year or 5 years and they say, "You know what? I
That's
just,
exactly the case.
yeah."
And I don't even personally care if you're sharing my reviews. This is the other thing, and you mentioned this sort of with the podcasting thing. Like, if you're not listening to podcasts, you're not going to be on a podcast. Look, I'm not. If you send me a query again, if I have the two queries and I look at one and I go there and I look and see, okay, Maddie has shared blogger reviews 20 times, not mine, but from other bloggers, then I know she's looking at those and values those. They're her authors, and many of them are the biggest names in the business who will only share their New York Times review or only share their People magazine profile, which is great and fine because you're at the stage in your career where you can do that. But most authors aren't.
Yeah.
Be careful with that, but know that we're seeing that. So if you're engaging, like if I know that you respect what other bloggers are doing, even if you've never been to BOLO Books, I'm going to give you a thumbs up because I know that. Just like I'm sure you, like if people talk about podcasts, you're like, oh, I don't care if you listen to me, but you're listening to the breadth of podcasts that are out there. So I know that you respect what we're doing because I'm not in the business of just doing things for the good of humanity. I mean, it's sort of that's what I'm doing, but, I want to know that what I'm doing is being respected by the people who are I'm benefiting in the long run.
Yeah. Well, we're actually going to loop back to that very topic, but there was one other don't that I think it's very important for us to hit, and that is don't take it personally if a blogger does not respond or is uninterested.
Yeah, and this is again the difference in that the people don't realize how many pitches we're getting. So I cannot respond to the 40 emails that I had in my inbox waiting for me when we end this podcast this morning, already there, and whatever's going to come in during the day. I just possibly can't possibly respond to them all. I've tried to respond to as many as possible, especially when I have something of use to say. If I don't have anything of use to say, I'm probably going to ignore it. And if your review pitch was the one liner generic thing that we already talked about, don't do, you're going to get ignored. But you don't know what's going on in a blogger's life. Like I said, most people, unless you followed me on social media, didn't know how close I was to my mother and how much that passing devastated me. So you would have no idea that the fact that I ignored your books all year was due to that and had nothing to do with you and your book. So you can got to have a thick skin in this industry, any industry really, but particularly in the book industry, and know that things are happening that are not in your control in any way, shape, or form. and should not be a reflection on the quality of what you're putting out there. Even if no book blog says yes to a review, it doesn't mean your book sucks. It does not have anything to do with that. It could be a whole host of reasons why each of those people said no, and it was the wrong timing. And a year from now, another blogger might find that book and give it a rave review. It might get picked up to be turned into a TV movie or whatever. You just never know. I mean, yeah, and you can listen to authors here. It's like, I mean, I keep going back to Anne Cleeve's. I'm just such a huge fan, but her first books were not hugely successful. And the first Vera book, she tells a story of how the weird ways that it got to actually get to television. So you just never know what's going to happen in the long run of something. So just try not to take it personally. And I know it's hard. I mean, believe me, I get devastated when I send out to a publisher and say, I really would love an arc of this book because I really want to review it. And I get back a response saying, sorry, we're not sending it to you. It does happen. And it devastates me every time. But I'm like, Chris, what do you care? You have 50 other books there that could be read on that day. Of course, I want to read that book. There's a reason I asked for it. But I just got to step back and say, maybe they don't have enough, whatever reason they didn't want me to have it and not take it personally. Like it just is what it is for whatever reason. Try to have that thicker skin. Know that nobody's out to get you. We're not like, oh, Maddie sent in her new request. Let's all say no so that she feels really bad about herself. Like it's just not, that's not what our goal is.
Yeah.
So know that, take it with a grain of salt and laugh about it if you can. And when you meet me at a conference, say, I'm sorry you didn't like my pitch when I sent it. Tell me something good that happened with the book. Somebody else reviewed it or whatever. And keep it in my head. And then when the next one comes along, I'll be like, you know what? Let me just give this. And it's another bad time. But you know what? Last time I told Maddie, no, I'm going to look at it this time just because I feel bad that I didn't last time. So you just never know what's going to work in the long run.
Yeah. It's
Another one of the ones we're not discussing, but this is one of my favorites too, and because people don't believe it actually happens. But if you're pitching me a book and you're going to say, my book is like Hank Philippi Ryan's style book, I think you might be interested because I see that you reviewed a lot of Hank Philippi Ryan's books. My books are better. Please don't ever put down another author in the email that you're
yeah.
sending me. Like, I know you maybe think your book is better than other people's, but we don't want to hear that. Like,
Yeah.
be supportive of the community, especially someone like I just because the example was Hank. Hank does everything for everybody. So
Yeah.
for you to say anything negative about what Hank is doing is not going to reflect good on you.
Yeah.
So it's the same sort of thing. So sure, tell me that your book is similar to other people's and I like that. So maybe I might like this, but don't ever tell me your book is better than that person's book.
Yeah. I had two other questions I wanted to ask you. One is about book tours. I just want to quickly ask you about what you think the pros and cons are of organized blog tours.
Yeah. I don't BOLO Books has never done organized book tours, and there's no real reason behind it other than the fact that again, I mean, I was doing this, I'm now retired from my day job, but when I started 10 years ago, I obviously had day jobs. Those were all schedule related. So I didn't want schedule related pastime, entertainment, blogging as well. So a blog tour requires you to say, yes, I'm going to post a review on this certain date, da 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 da. It's much too structured for what I do. Again, I'm trying to do those 4 weeks around the release date, but I don't want any deadline that I have to keep to take the fun out of it for me. So that's the reason I've never done that. And I also don't think they're as successful in the United States as they are in the UK. UK authors and blog tours are much better run and organized. And I don't know what that is, why that is. I've talked to some of my colleagues in the UK to see what the difference is, but I can't really pinpoint it exactly. But I just say, I mean, there are definitely good blog tour companies out there. My biggest stress is to make sure you're talking to your colleagues and finding out which ones are working for them. Because for the ones that are good, there's a whole lot of them out there that just want to take your money and they really aren't doing anything. Because in the long run, the blog tour is doing nothing that they're offering you is not stuff you can't do on your own. It just takes effort and time. Now, maybe you don't have the effort and time, and the payoff is to pay somebody else to do it. And that's okay as long as you know that you're paying for something you could be doing yourself. But if the time is more important to you than the money, then I say, okay, consider it. Again, do your research and make sure you're getting ones that are actually getting results. When I use this example in my classes so that people understand exactly why I say these things, but many of these contracts from with blog tours say, I'm going to reach out to 100 bloggers for you and try to get you reviews. So that's like a standard sort of thing, 50 reviewers or whatever it is, that bloggers that they're going to pitch. Well, I know of at least 3 companies. Again, BOLO Books does know, never had done blog tours. I have told these 3 companies I do not do blog tours, and still every book that they have that comes across, they send me a pitch saying, "Chris, will you do the blog tour for this?" I know they're doing this because then they can go back honestly to the author and say, "I reached out to 100 people, here are the names of them." What the author doesn't know is that 4 of those names, at least, maybe 50 of those names, have already said, "We never do blog tours." So they're not really offering you what they're saying they're offering because they're just coming back to us because they know us as bloggers and using us as a name on a list. Just be careful with that. That's the only thing I say is to make sure. And again, I don't want to discourage them from doing them completely because there are some that are doing great things and really do work. Just make sure you're doing your research and you know what you're spending your money on and you're getting results from
Yeah. I keep saying I just have one more question, but it's not true. I have 2 more questions. The first question is, if people aren't currently reading book reviews, but they want to start reading book reviews, either as a reader or as an author, what's the best way to find the reviews that are best match for them as an author?
Again, it's social media. I mean, you've got to follow things. Authors will often come to me and say, "Why don't I review more cozy books on my thing?" Because I'm focused on crime fiction. But I don't. I read a lot of cozies. Not a lot. I read more cozies than people think I read. But I don't review a lot of them because there are blogs that are covering that exclusively and doing it much better than I could ever hope to do. So there's no reason for me to do that. So I'm trying to fill a hole where there is not a lot of coverage. Of course, the cozy authors would argue that I'm covering things that everybody else are covering. So, I mean, you can't please everybody. And there's just no way you can do that. But um, look to see why it is. Like, if you're writing a cozy book and you want to pitch to BOLO Books, and I say go for it, but look at my past cozy reviews to see what it is about those cozies that got them reviewed. You'll quickly, it won't take more than 1 or 2 or 3. Well, it'll take more than 1 because you wouldn't really know, but 2 or 3, you're going to see that it's diversity that will do that. Like, if you're writing a diverse, cozy mystery, I'm probably going to read it and might cover it if I love it because that's a passion of mine. And I want to hear voices that aren't getting out there. So if you've done your research, you'll know that my cozies are hand selected, say. So you just got to find the reviewers that you like. And I actually have followers who disagree with me completely. They hate the kind of books I review, but they follow me because then they know what books to avoid. I don't think it's the greatest way to do it, but if it works and it gets me a follower, I'm like, go for it. I mean, they tend to seem to like the way I write and they like enjoy reading my reviews, but they're like, that is not a book I would ever read because I don't like domestic suspense or I don't like psychological stuff. So it's interesting, but you want to find bloggers that either agree with you or disagree with you on some of the books that you like. Like if you loved a new book you read, do a search on reviews of that book, and that'll lead you to bloggers who reviewed it. Then you can start to follow their other stuff and see if you begin to have similarities with them. That's the way I would say it. I would say use what you're reading when you find a book you love, then go look for reviews of it. And it's also fun just to see if people agree with what you agree with. I mean, like if you loved it because the character was flawed and da 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 da, and you read a review that says, "Oh my God, this flawed character was so relatable," da, 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 you suddenly feel a connection with them. So sort of validates your reading experience as well. So yeah, just follow reviews of things that you're currently reading, and then that'll lead you to reviews of books that you.
Well, I can imagine that a really useful homework assignment for the listeners is to go look up reviews of the books they're using as comps.
Yeah,
Because that
also
could be super interesting to, if I think Ann Cleeves is a comp of mine and I'm reading her reviews and they're all about I love all the details about Shetland. Okay, maybe I can't do that, but I understand now that people love books with a strong sense of place, or the reviewers are loving a book because it has a strong sense of place, and maybe that is actually a comp, but it could be a really interesting confirmation of whether the things you think are comps are really comps.
and it might lead you to other comps that you don't know because I mean, we
Yeah.
all know how difficult it is to find comps. But if I'm writing a review of someone's book reference, and I try not to do this often, but if I do compare it to another book or another author's style, usually it means it's really similar. But that might be an author you know nothing about. So if you're using Ann Cleeves as a comp and I'm comparing her to someone else, well, then maybe those other person's books are also a comp for you that you can use in a later pitch. So it can
Yeah.
lead you down a rabbit trail of interesting information that you didn't know you were going to discover when you just sat down to read a review of a new book.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, this is going to be my last question. And we've been talking a lot about reviewers from the author's point of view, but somebody might be listening to this and saying, I would love to be a book blogger. I would love to be a book reviewer. If somebody's saying that, can you just give, like, how do you respond to that? If somebody comes up to you in the bar at the conference hotel and says, I want to do what you do, what do you say to them?
Happens a lot, and I say, "Do it." I say, there's always room for more book blog because there is no way any one of us, any 10 of us, any 1,000 of us can cover every book that's out there. So more and more. I say, find a niche that you like, something that you enjoy, your niche that is personal to you, and then run with it. You can also do a general book blog and just review everything you read, whatever you want to do. I think you're going to have better luck if you narrow your focus because people are going to know to come to you. They know to come to me for crime fiction. They don't come to me for young adult unless it's crime related. Find what you want to do, what you're passionate about, and go with it. And know that your opinion matters. I mean, again, we're not trained people. I mean, I do have an English degree, obviously have been criticizing works for my whole college and schooling career and then beyond. So it's not like I came out of the blue, but we all have opinions. I mean, all a book review is an opinion. If you can back that opinion up, it's a valid opinion. So don't be shy and say, oh, well, I'm not that important or I don't know that much. Like, I don't care if it's the first book you've ever read in the genre that you're about to review. If you have an opinion about it, it's a valid opinion and people will like to hear it. I mean, writers want to know what the average reader is experiencing because they can learn from that, maybe even more than they can learn from what the critics are saying because the critics are bringing true critics are bringing baggage with them that they are like are comparing it to the breadth, the genre, the history of it. So your fresh take on it might give them some new insight that they never even thought of, or shock that they're like, "Oh my god, I am so dismayed that people feel this way about this book. That was not my intention. I need to change that in a future book if it's a series or something along those lines." Just know that your opinion matters no matter who you are. So if that's what you want to do, jump in and do it. Know that it's not lucrative. I'm not making any money from this. In fact, I pay a lot of money to keep domain names and this, that, and the other security systems going. So you're going to end up paying money to do this kind of thing. But if it's a passion of yours, don't be shy about jumping in there. And then if you already have a blog going and it's not as successful as you want it to be, watch what others of us are doing, like see Drew and I going to conventions and say, okay, maybe I need to go to the next young adult convention. I'm covering young adult books. It seems to be going to a convention is the way to get money out there. Go there. They're looking for people to moderate those panels, just like every other convention out there. Put yourself out there, take the leap. You never know where it's going to lead. I never thought I would win the MWA Raven Award. Never expected to be a Coast Crime guest of honor. I never expected to have a column in every issue of Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine. I mean, these are not things I set out as goals. They just happened along the way. So you just never know what's going to be down the pipe for you. So I say jump in and do it. Ask for advice, ask for help. We're happy to give it to you. We're a tight knit community, especially in the crime fiction community, but I imagine that all blogs are that way. So find the other people, network, and make it happen for yourselves.
So cool. Well, Christopher, thank you so much. I appreciate you accommodating my wide ranging set of questions, but please let the listeners and viewers know where they can go to find out more about you and Bolo Books online.
Yep, you can find me at bolobooks.com. You can follow me at Kristopher Zgorski on Facebook. You can follow me as Bolo Books on both Twitter and Instagram. So everybody knows me as the eyeball guy. If you see the eyeball behind me on the
Yeah,
wall, everybody knows that's my logo. So that's easy to spot. So if you see that anywhere on social media or in the conference world, don't hesitate to walk up and say hi, introduce yourself, and start a conversation.
great. Thank you so much, Christopher.
Thanks so much.